Welcome back to the Planet Soccer Show. We're going to go with show now. I think we should probably change our channel.
Changing
Welcome
it
back to the
again.
Planet Soccer Show. I am your host today, Dylan, up in Michigan, newly married. Shout out to my new wife, Abigail. Love ya. Shout out Reed and Shelby for making the trip up to cold and rainy Michigan. What are we, 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, whatever we're at now. But we are back.
Yeah.
The EPL is back. And it felt real good to have club soccer back. I was, full disclosure, driving back from our mini moon. So I am not going to be the most analytical person today, but we are back. And it was an exciting week with not always analytical. Was that the look?
No, I'm just, you'll probably be more analytical than me. Who knows? Maybe I'll pull something out. So I've
You always do.
watched most of the games, but you definitely did more statistical
We,
research
we
than I
we
did.
can always count on you for the on-field analytics at least.
Yeah.
But we are back, another episode of Buy or Sell, match week 9 in the Premier League. It's kind of crazy that we're coming up on 10 weeks already. It feels like we haven't been doing this that long this year, but we are back. Pretty exciting week, especially if you're a Spurs fan.
Yeah.
Going top of the table today as we record on Monday, the 23rd. Very exciting, very tight-knit. Top of the table in the Premier League. Reed, how you feeling? How we doing? How much did you hate Michigan weather compared to Texas and the drive from Chicago to Metro Detroit because flights were that much cheaper? So where are we at after kind of a long weekend last weekend for you?
You know, the weather was kind of a nice like change of pace. I think Shelby and I were both looking forward to getting somewhere that had like actual fall because we don't have fall here. We have summer. We have our 2 week ice storm season, and then we have early summer. But yeah, no, the drive was fine. I mean, there was lots of construction, but um,
Yep.
it was
Michigan,
it's
we got
go
two
ahead.
seasons, winter and construction. So
There you
I'm
go.
I'm glad you can finally accept that and realize that, like the
Yeah.
rest of us up here.
This international break felt really long to me. It felt
It did.
like the longest one we've ever had to go through. But we are back. It was a great week, great weekend of games, and yeah, Spurs alone at the top of the table now. No tiebreakers needed. Just winning the games they're supposed to win, and that's all you can really ask at this point in the season. So yeah, you know,
Jump right in then, right
all
on
right.
Spurs. So
Um,
going into, I'm going to hit you with the first buy or sell here.
okay.
Going into today, so all of my show prep was done before the game today. So don't word for word quote my research on Spurs predicted finish by the sports books. But Spurs going into today secured a 2-0 win against Fulham, was projected fourth by DraftKings, and I'm guessing most major sports books. Because DraftKings, when betting got legal up here, was the most generous. Yeah, most generous. Sports book is kind of my sports book of preference now, but DraftKings had them as the fourth best odds to win the Premier League. And I want you to buy or sell is fourth realistically the best spot for Spurs as far as winning the Premier League, not in terms of finish, but in terms of winning the Premier League. Do you currently have them at the fourth best odds? Does that make sense to you? Do you think they should be higher, or do you think they should be lower?
I think it makes sense when I think about the three teams that would be 1, 2, and 3. But at the same time, I think Man City is worse than they were last year. I think they feel different this year. I actually think Arsenal's quite a bit worse than they were last year. They're getting results, and Arsenal fans have been kind of weird online about Tottenham getting lucky and some of our performances. But man, I mean, they've looked really, really bad in some games, and they're getting these late equalizers, late winners, which I mean is I'm not going to fault them for that. That's what you have to do. Tottenham beat a Fulham team today at home that Arsenal drew at home. So talk about Spurs schedule all you want, but you have to win the games that are in front of you. I think that Tottenham's going to be one of those teams where like I'm most people, all people probably that follow the sport, aren't going to think they have any shot to win the title until they win the title. They're just not going to get any credit from their own fans or from other fans. January is probably the most important window for them in a very long time. Um, More so even than a lot of teams that are up there, because a lot of those teams do have depth and Tottenham just doesn't. They're a James Madison injury away from scraping by in a European spot. So it's sitting here right now. I would say fourth is right. I would say it's right. Um, yeah, I think so.
With that in mind, is there a team? So full disclosure, the top three ahead of Tottenham were City, obviously, Arsenal, and Liverpool. Is
Mhm.
there a team in the top three you think you guys should have better odds than? And if so, if you're saying fourth, is there a team below you guys think should have better odds than you and that team? Um, like you just spoke to Arsenal not looking as good as previous years, and they're clear, far and away, not even really that close. The number two right now,
Mhm.
according to the sports books. So is there a team you think should be ahead of you, ahead of Arsenal? Do you think you should be ahead of Arsenal? How do you see that playing out, or do you think fourth as a table projection is kind of the right spot for you guys right now?
I think it's kind of the right spot, but at the same time, I feel like it's just too early to really have City or Arsenal's needle move too much. Like they were the two clear favorites going into the year. They haven't done anything to really like not make that live up to the projection. So based on where they're at in the table, I think it's more so Tottenham surprising people than Arsenal and City not performing. Despite City's stinker against whoever they lost to recently. Um, but it's weird because I think that I like where Tottenham's sitting. I hate that people give Tottenham shit for not being a big club, but they're the first club in everybody's mouth about talking shit. Like everybody loves talking shit about Tottenham, but at the same time, apparently we aren't worth the dirt on the bottom of our shoes, but yet still talking about us. So
So
I'm
you're buying fourth and the three above you.
yeah, I don't think anybody below us. I think you guys would be the closest. Um, Villas, if they keep being consistent, I'll consider them right up there with you guys. But just with you two, with y'all having multiple games a week, and we're gonna add in the FA Cup here recently or
Yeah.
here soon, and y'all are still in the Carabao Cup. So I don't know. It's just week 9. Like I think it's the right time for Tottenham fans to start feeling better about our season and how we were feeling at the start, obviously, but it's still too early for Man City and Arsenal's needle to move down. Liverpool, I would say, is the team that they're kind of the dark horse, I guess. You have to respect Liverpool. I know they're back, but at the same time, I just it's some feels like it could go wrong for me, but it also feels like they could go right and they could win the Europa League and the Premier League. So it's it's a really weird time for those odds right now to
It,
really dive either way.
yeah, it is a little weird, but like
I
I
don't know
know
where
we're
we
only
started
nine.
though. I would need to know like where we started
Oh, like
as
eighth
far
or
as
ninth,
yeah,
probably. To be honest, especially
yeah,
after
yeah.
the Kane sale, I would guess eighth, maybe as high as seventh, as low as ninth. I'm gonna go ahead and sell. Like I firmly believe I'm infinitely more impressed with Spurs right now than I am Arsenal. Yes, it's
Yeah.
9 games in, but there's nothing I've seen from Arsenal that tells me they can win the league. Are we talking about table position at the end of the year? Yes, Arsenal could certainly finish ahead of Tottenham, and I know that sounds really weird, but I do firmly believe Tottenham is more likely in my mind to win this league than Arsenal. There's just too many question marks. There's injuries. Now, granted, their injuries are coming early in the season, and they are still in third out of first by 2 points, I believe. So there's certainly still some positive regression, if you will, for Arsenal. But so far through 9 weeks, Spurs is far and away the most impressive team. So I'm really, really hard pressed to put Arsenal ahead of them. I would probably put City because it's City and Pep, and I would put Liverpool because they have looked, unfortunately, absolutely phenomenal so far this year ahead of Spurs. But there's nothing I've seen that puts Arsenal ahead of Spurs at this point. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah,
So I do think I would have you guys as, in my opinion, the third best odds. Arsenal right now is second. I personally, if I was like creating my own sports book, which I'm not, don't hit me in my DMs. Well, hit us in our DMs, so interact with us. I would probably go City, Liverpool, Spurs, then Arsenal.
yeah,
But right now, I just don't see a lot from Arsenal that leads me to believe they can really contend for the championship, even with City having the kind of regression that they're having right now. So I
yeah.
do kind of think that like Spurs at four, I don't think it's going to happen, but like I wouldn't hate if somebody went out there and threw a bet on it because I do think that the Liverpool money isn't quite as good. The Arsenal money, I would not in a million years. You could give me money and I would choose to keep it rather than bet it on Arsenal winning the league at this point. And
Yeah.
as you know, and our listeners know, I'm normally very, very high on Arsenal and Arteta in the last year and a half. But what I've seen from Arsenal, nothing tells me that they can actually go out and win this league. I do think fixtures do have something to do with it. I do think that has something to do with Spurs being where they're at in the table. First, what was it? We bantered on Twitter a little bit. Spurs first five were the easiest in the whole Premier League. So
Mhm.
that obviously does have something to do with it. But beyond that, like I've just seen very solid, very sound, very honestly beautiful performances put forward from Spurs thus far that lead me to believe Spurs should be a little bit better than fourth best
Spurs
odds at this
Spurs
point.
feel a lot like Arsenal did last year. Is kind of
Yeah,
how I
no, I
how I look at it. You know, everybody was kind of
well,
saying, "Well, who have they played? Who have they? Well, they just keep winning. They just keep winning," and that's kind of how this team is. I agree with you. I would say that Tottenham has a better chance than Arsenal to win, but I also recognize the fact that the odds
it's
started at the
Spurs.
beginning. They also the odds started at the beginning of the season. Arsenal hasn't done enough to really move back, but I haven't liked what I've seen from them. Tottenham's taken 4 points from Liverpool and Arsenal already. Um, so yeah, it'll be obviously interesting to see if the injuries can stay off the squad for Tottenham, and if Arsenal like finds themselves again, because I don't think they really have an identity. So yeah,
Yeah, so we'll kind of move on. Same kind of general concept. Buy or sell. It is time to accept the big eight, and I will kind of leave this open ended to start with. But it's time to accept the big eight. Are we looking to add Villa, add Brighton, or add Newcastle? So we're really talking Big Nine or Chelsea or Man U falling out of it. Are you ready to accept that there is truly a Big Eight, if you will, or Big Nine even at this point in the Premier League season, or kind of in the same breath as Tottenham? Is it kind of too early to tell?
so I think we have to clarify like what we mean by big eight. You've got like the big six, which is like
The
revenue,
traditionals, yeah.
media, perception, fan bases, like outside of the country, all that, which makes up the big six. The big eight for me, I put big eight on our slideshow and I didn't include Brighton, consciously didn't include Brighton because I think Brighton, like, they're run really well. But if a few things like slip, I think they could go back down to 11th, 12th. They have much more room for decline than I think Villa or Newcastle do, which have a far bigger backing, bigger fan bases, and just more history
Bigger
and
pockets.
more prestige. Yeah. Um, so I think that on the field, yeah, I mean it's time to accept the big eight, big nine. I think definitely big seven, including Newcastle. Aston Villa has to, they don't have the Saudi backing, so we have. What are you gonna say, Don?
I don't know, man. Like Villa's scary. Like I would firmly put Villa ahead of every. I would very firmly this season, not long term, but this season, I would put Villa firmly in sixth. Obviously, that has a bit to do with Chelsea's struggles
Mhm.
and Man U's struggles. But I would very, very firm like Villa under
So we just talking
Unai
on
is
the field this year? Is that what we're talking about?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, okay.
as a in a vacuum this year,
Yeah.
because you talk big eight, you can't not include Chelsea, you can't not include Man U because
Yeah.
we're talking total gross of the clubs as a whole.
Mhm.
But this year in a vacuum, like I have a really hard time believing Villa and Newcastle will not both qualify for Europa League or better. Both are at the very top of the scoring in the league. Both are at the very top of home field advantage, if you will, in the league. The only two clubs averaging 2.5 goals or better, which is, I know we're only 9 weeks in, 2.5 goals as a team is phenomenal, and both Newcastle and Villa are far exceeding that. Well, far exceeding that. Newcastle like 2.7, Villa's at like 2.8, but far exceeding that at this point in the season. I have a really really hard time not including them both in the big six. There's a very strong likelihood that we have a additional Champions League spot with the new format with the Premier League. Most likely, we'll see how Europe goes. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but we'll see how Europe goes. There's a very, very strong likelihood that the Premier League does see 5 teams in the Champions League and the sixth team getting Europa League. I have a very hard time seeing one, even just one of these two missing out on one of those spots based off of what we've seen thus far. Both teams have looked absolutely phenomenal at home. Obviously, both of them have a couple of matches that are distorting that
Yeah.
goals per game
That's what I was gonna
average.
say.
Newcastle's got 8 against Sheffield and 5 against Villa. Villa's got a couple of 4 and 5 goal games. Newcastle's had another 4 goal game against Palace. So the goals for is a little distorted at this point, but at the same time, like 9 games in soccer is not a small sample size, and seeing both teams averaging closer to 3 goals than 2.5 goals at this point in time is pretty remarkable. And I think something that we definitely should keep an eye on moving forward, and something that gives me a lot of faith. And I also think both have top 4 managers in the Premier League. If I had to give my top 4, I would go Pep, I would go Unai, I would go Eddie and Ange, and I would probably put Arteta in 5. I don't know if I would go
Hmm.
Eddie or Ange for 3 or 4. Like I think it's kind of a toss up at this point in the season, but like I firmly believe those are the 4 best managers, and there's certainly a whole lot of talent on both of those teams. So I find it really hard to believe that both of those teams will miss out on, or one of those two teams, I'm sorry, one of those teams will miss out on Europa League at this point,
So,
especially with the added spot.
do you think the teams that are in the top 6 right now will be the top 6 in some order come the end of the year? You got Tottenham, City, Arsenal, Liverpool, Villa, and Newcastle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I buy the ever living shit out of that. To be honest, but like I haven't seen anything from United that breaks in. De Zerbi's great, but has made, especially this last weekend, some weird decisions in the starting lineup, and I don't think Brighton will have the money to spend in January like those other clubs. And I think Chelsea is, as weird as it sounds, when they spent billions, literally, of dollars.
Mhm.
Um, Saying that they don't quite have the money or the resources or the talent to compete. I yeah, I kind of see, like, we're gonna get into parity here in a little bit, but I kind of do see like the top 6 right now being the top 6,
I
and
mean, it's not an
what order they
outlandish
fall
it's
in.
not an outlandish thing to say by any means.
No, what order they fall in, I think, is up for
I
grabs.
think
But
most people you ask would say, yeah, probably. I mean, obviously anything can happen, but if all stays the same, I'd say
there's more
those are
depth
the
on
6 clear
there's
favorites.
more depth on Villa and Newcastle than you would typically see from like those fringe competitors, those
Yeah.
those non Big Six competitors. I think there's a lot more depth than your average fan would give them credit for. So yeah, I do kind of see like the attacks have been insane from both of those clubs, and I do think there's going to be a little bit of changing of the guard, if you will, this year. And I'm also just a massive Unai Emery fan. It's obvious from our preseason predictions. I'm very very high on Villa. I think two was probably a reach, looking back on it now, but Champions League doesn't feel like that crazy of a reach. You know, a couple injuries hit Spurs or a couple injuries hit Arsenal, and there's no reason Villa can't finish in the top four. So yeah, it's a weird time, but there is a lot of parity, and I think we're fully seeing a not changing of the guard where we're seeing a lot of the big clubs step out of the spotlight, but a little bit, a couple of newcomers to the party, making some noise.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and segue into the parity in the Premier League this year. Dylan, you've got a lot of numbers on this slide. I'm going to let you take the lead on it, but we just talked about how close those top six are right now, and we didn't even mention, well, we mentioned Chelsea and United, but they're not in that top six. You've got Brighton, who's going to be in and around there come the end, and then some other teams who over the past couple of years have just been really steady and are going to finish in that 10th range, and it's about how many points they can get, whether they're closer to the Champions League spots or the relegation zone. So um, parity in the EPL this year, Dylan.
All right, so buy or sell. I don't know if either of us actually answered buy or sell yet, but buy or sell 2023-2024 season will be the closest top four race in this millennium. I full disclosure, I didn't go back past '01 to oh no 2000 to '01. I did not research past that. I think most of our listeners, judging by our YouTube statistics, probably weren't watching, so probably aren't well versed enough, like us, to speak on it. So we'll say the closest top four race since the new millennium. Do you
So
think
we're
it
saying
buy or
basically
sell?
how many teams within
Well,
the
we'll say 10 points. We'll
okay,
say
so how
10
many
points.
teams are within that
Are
4
within
points
10
of
points of reaching fourth place. And 10 points feels like a decent gap, but in reality it's two or three games here and there for two or three sides that can
mhm.
really decide it. For reference, we'll give some reference here. Last year there were only 3 teams within 10 points, and the max over the last, what are we at, 22 years, has been 6 teams, and that's happened twice in 2020, 2021, and 03, 04. There were 6 teams. So for reference, we would need Chelsea and Man U to both finish within 10. I think they're not locks, but like it's Chelsea and Man U. If they don't finish within 10, I'd be very surprised. So we need one of Palace, Fulham, Wolves, Forest, or Brentford to finish within 10 points. Do we think one of those 5 teams can finish within 10 points of the top four? Is really the crux of this question.
I'm going to sell just because there's underlying math in this about like how few teams the relegation teams would have, like how many points basically everybody else below that would have to have so many less points for the teams above them to
Or the league winner has so few points. Or the league winner isn't just like the cities of the past or the Man
Mhm.
Uniteds of the early to mid 2000s just aren't quite as dominant. Do we not see a 95-point winner this year? That's the other kind of wrinkle to this
Yeah,
is the bottom 5 seem really solid right now, but it also to me comes down to that top end of the table. Is City, Arsenal, Liverpool, Spurs, are one of those 4 teams going to secure 95 plus points? I don't know. I don't know. So it is kind of a, on the surface, when I first started researching this, I'm like, there's no way,
yeah.
because there is so much parity in the bottom 10, but is there enough parity in the top 5 that it is kind of realistic?
That's a good question. I look at these Palace Fulham. I mean, I watched Fulham play today. I mean, they didn't look
Hey, don't hate on
bad.
Jedi. Jedi had a couple of nice runs on the outside, all right? Give
Yeah.
our guy some credit. No, you're right. Yeah, they did not look that good.
I mean, my like brain says Brentford would probably be the easy bet, but they haven't looked great this year, and they,
Mm-mm.
um, who knows how they're going to do in January in the window. So I don't know, that's tough. I'm gonna sell it just because I think the
Yeah.
math is too complicated. I think the winner of the league this year has an average amount of points for the winner of the Premier
No.
League.
And
Um,
and I tend to agree. Like when I first started to want to pose this question, I went 5 teams. So like
yeah,
is 10 going to be within 10 points of four? And I went, yeah. And then you really look at it, and those two sixes in the last couple of years, what was that, 3 years ago, and then 10 years ago, kind of threw a wrench in my question
yeah,
as I did my research. I do think 5 or 6 is very, very, very likely. I think getting a seventh is going to be tough though. Like 11th being within 10 points of fourth seems pretty unrealistic. It seemed like a really good question on the surface, and then the more I dug into
I
it, I
mean,
kind
the
of went,
underlying
I
theme of
don't
the
know.
question is there, like the parity in the EPL. I mean, how often do you have 8 teams that you're
Oh
legitimately
yeah,
like they could be a Champions League team?
on
Normally it's
on
like
on it
6.
on average, it's less than 3 teams within 10 points of fourth place.
Yeah,
Like we're way above that.
yeah,
Like we are again since the new millennium. Don't argue me in the comments about the 1998 season. I don't want to hear it. I wasn't watching soccer at that point. But if you look at the last, 22, 23 years, the average is just over 2 and 3/4 teams within 10 points. I think we're far and away beyond that. And
yeah,
I think that's kind of the crux of the excitement for a lot of people. But as far as are we going to see seven, I also have to agree. We'll sell, or I will sell as well. But as far as parity and excitement goes, it's the first time since the 60s we've seen an average of over 3 goals. So even like combine the parity with the goal scoring, you could argue this is the most exciting season. Yes, the Aguero from Balotelli goal and whatever the heck year that was, I can't think of it off the top of my head.
I think it was
2013 or
2012,
14.
2013.
Yeah, 13. Sure, like if you want to argue excitement as far as final day, I can agree with that. But if we're talking about goals, which everybody loves to see,
Yeah,
and soccer gets crapped on frequently for not, and parity, you could argue this is going to be the most exciting Premier League season. Granted, we're only 9 games in, but when you're talking about the most goals on average since the 60s, and going to be flirting with that 6 or 7 teams within 10 points, I think it's a really exciting year. And always got to bring it back to it, the expansion into the U.S. It is a very exciting time. World Cup coming up, and having the EPL be this tight and this exciting. Not a lot of 1-0 matches. We're seeing a lot of,
yeah,
3-1s or 2-1 matches. It's a really exciting time.
yeah. It is. I'm gonna kind of segue into one of mine, Dylan. And do you think the parity in the EPL will end up impacting England teams in Europe? Buy or sell, an England team will not win a European competition this year.
I'll
I think
I'll
the best shot is Liverpool winning Europa.
I'll buy that no England team will win a European trophy because it will be Liverpool having to win Europa while also trying to push for Champions League. Like you do have to balance it a little bit.
Yeah,
While Europa is an automatic qualifier, and there are likely 5 teams from the Premier League advancing to Champions League, you do have to kind of balance that, and I think that's tough. I don't know if the Liverpool depth is there, so it'll be kind of interesting to see. I almost think it'll be good for Europe if Liverpool is 6 to 8 points out come March,
hmm,
because then they will really be able to make a push for Europa. But I don't see City doing it. I don't feel like Villa's going to do it because I do legitimately think they'll make a push for Champions League. So yeah, no, I'll buy that there will not be a. It feels crazy to say as good as English soccer is right now, but yeah, I'll buy that there won't be an English team that wins in Europe this year, and that it feels weird, it feels crazy, but like yeah, Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I'll go ahead and buy that. I like on the surface, it feels like what are we talking about? We have
yeah.
8 teams in England that are very high end, very high end teams, and if they played, you throw all 8 teams in groups with, 8 other teams from the other 5 leagues. I'd say um, 4 at least probably win that group if it was like some mass competition. But yeah, because of the way things are set up in the Premier League, I almost think the parity in the Premier League will hinder the European trophy success for England as a whole.
I think what a lot of people don't realize when they talk about England's lack of success recently over the last 15 years in Europe, relative lack of success compared to the strength of the league is there's a clear difference between sticking an England team in a European competition and sticking one of those teams in a European competition in the Premier League and asking them to play a 38 game season. Very different. We've said it on here before. La Liga teams, Serie A teams, they're built for these continental competitions. The style of play is much more built for that. But you stick, I don't know, the third best La Liga team in the Premier League, they would do much worse in the Premier League than they would probably perform in the European competition. So that's an interesting dynamic of soccer that I don't think a lot of people realize. And there's just one guy I always see on TikTok that's just always trashing the Premier League for their teams losing in European competitions. And one-off games are fine, but it's yeah, I mean, you got to prove it for a season, and I think that's why the Premier League's prestige is
There's also a whole hell of a lot of money in England.
yeah,
And like not that there's not in Europe, but there is a whole hell of a lot of money to Villa finishing 5th and qualifying in that 5th spot for Champions League compared to really pushing to win Conference League. Like
yeah,
what is the benefit to Villa winning Conference League? Sure, they get an automatic bid to Europa, but why not just try and secure Champions League and the fallback is Europa from Premier League competition, or are we really going to push Conference League for Villa? Like,
right,
no, probably not. Like, is this Villa team significantly better than West Ham last year? Absolutely. But
yeah,
West Ham had to win Conference League last year. And this year, there is no have to win for Villa, in my opinion, to win the Conference League. I think Europa League is, especially with the expanded format, is probably their floor. Like, I really don't see Villa finishing lower than 6th, and that's Europa League. So do you finish 6th while trying to push for 5th in the Premier League, or do you finish 10th and win Conference League? Like, yes, you get a trophy out of it, but I think if you ask Villa fans, and I think if you ask a lot of Premier League fans, they would much rather that 5th in the Prem than the championship of Conference League.
yeah. Well, Unai Emery loves himself some Europa League, so he's going to do anything he can to get in there. Well, speaking of coaches, Dylan, buy or sell, sacking Gary O'Neill is the biggest mistake in AFC Bournemouth history.
All right, so this was initially my buy or sell. Was the my initial buy or sell was, is this the biggest blunder of the year? I'm guessing you changed this
Yeah,
because it was a clear and obvious yes. It is
yeah,
the biggest
yeah,
blunder because Bournemouth is a train wreck and Wolves is currently sitting in 12th, as I predicted, and you made fun of me for. But to full disclosure, I don't know enough of Bournemouth history. It feels like it could be though, because this could be, as I really rooted for and predicted, an Everton double drop. It not that I'm saying it will be a Bournemouth double drop if they drop, but it could be a we're stuck in the championship for 3 or 4 years if we do drop. So I'll buy it, but full disclosure on somewhat lack of Bournemouth
I'm sure they
club
made a mistake
history.
in the 50s that was worse, but
Yeah, right,
we're
right.
going with the hyperbole here.
65-year-old men listening to our channel, if you are, I love that you're listening to us.
Yeah.
65-year-old Bournemouth fan men or women, if you're listening to us, leave it to us in the comments. But yeah, I'll go. In at least in the here and now, it is a massive, massive mistake. I think we both talked about it. Either in our it was probably in our preview, not
I think it
not probably
was,
our
yeah.
year recap. I touched on it. I really like Gary O'Neill. I think he's a huge part of what made Bournemouth last year, and the fact that he was able to find another Premier League club, I think, is fantastic. And yeah, I mean, Bournemouth looks bad. They look really they like. I don't want to say they're a surefire relegation team, um, but who is right now other
Yeah.
than Sheffield? Like, if we got to put our money on a second to worst finish right now, it's probably Bournemouth. Like it's not Burnley. I'm getting ready to get over this hype train, but they do still have company. I'm still holding on hope. My old college Man City fandom is still holding on hope for company, and at the end of the day, Everton will probably get bailed out either by the FA or by an investor. And Luton has looked phenomenal. A very gutty win over the weekend at Forest. So yeah, Bournemouth isn't looking good. I'm sorry, Michael B. Jordan. Really loved the Creed movies, but your club is not looking too hot right now. Yeah, I
Yeah.
really think they shouldn't have gotten rid of Gary O'Neill, because I do think he is a large part of their ability to stay up last year.
Yeah, it looks like a pretty big mistake. A lot of people were respecting Bournemouth after their performance last year and giving them a lot of
I know we were.
going into this year, and I certainly was. So they look like the team we thought they would look like last year for sure. Dylan, you saw Lionel Messi play in person on Friday. Friday, right? Is that when
I
it was?
did.
What was
Saturday.
that like?
Um, it was awesome for me. I will say my 4-year varsity letter, now wife, was very unimpressed with his uh, effort, to say the least.
That's come
But then
into the spotlight recently.
it
Where
and I get it. I do get it, but I
yeah,
also appreciate and understand, and no knock on her appreciation or understanding of soccer, but I appreciate and understand his 37-year-old body probably can't perform at the highest level for 90 minutes. But man, when he had a couple of opportunities, he was phenomenal. I right in front of me, front row, albeit upper deck, front row, upper deck at whatever the heck it is, Bank of America Stadium, just center goal, ball over the top. He chips the keeper. I went nuts. Abby goes, "That's offsides," and I went, "Oh, yep, it probably is." And sure enough, it was offsides.
yeah,
So I did see Lionel Messi put the ball in the back of the net, live and in person, albeit an offsides call, and albeit him being kind of lazy all game. But all seriousness, I do firmly believe he is one of the best of all time. If not the best of all time. The ability to get out of tight spaces was phenomenal, and something like you see on TV, and like you see in, especially, he's never played in the Prem, and we're both Prem and UCL guys, so we've seen it in the UCL, but not seeing it on a week in week out basis. Just getting to experience that in person was pretty awesome. Shout out to Charlotte though. Charlotte
yeah.
FC, phenomenal environment.
Really?
Squeaked into the playoffs on the last game of the season. Truly a phenomenal environment.
Yeah, I mean
They're
Messi in
ultras, if
town,
you
and you have
will.
a chance to clinch
Oh, even
playoffs. So
no. So that all right. So shout out Charlotte, but the one knock I have, they were booing Messi every time he touched the ball, and I got a problem with that. And
interesting.
we're really not sitting here and booing one of the three, you can't argue, one of the three greatest footballers of all time.
Somebody out there
We're
will argue with you.
Yeah, and they can hit
Yeah,
me in the comments, hit me on my DMs. I'll be up all night. I am ready to fight this battle. Messi is undoubtedly one of the three best footballers of all time, and I understand he's playing in the MLS, and you might not like the publicity he gives, positive or negative, but booing Messi is wild to me. But
yeah,
truly, getting to see Messi in person was incredibly special. I recommend to everybody in the States. It sounds like he will firmly be here for at least another year. I highly recommend going to see it because while he did look lazy at times, I will agree when he was on the ball, man, it was truly something special, something that can't be taught, something that I'm sure was very well practiced by him growing up. But it was really special to get to see him play in person, and his first touch on the ball is even better in person than you could imagine just
Yeah.
watching on TV. He's special. He's my goat. I'm a little biased because I got to see him in person and not Pele or any of the others, but he's my goat. I've seen him in person now, so I can die a happy football fan at this point.
There you go. I think that's it. Yeah,
Yeah, no, yeah,
guys,
that's it.
go ahead, Devin.
Don't
Close us
forget
out.
to Oh, I got this. I'm hosting this week. Give it to me. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, retweet, stitch if we post on TikTok, which we don't do as much as we should. I'm
I'm just
sorry.
gonna start
And
posting
all
TikToks
of
of
the other
myself.
things. You really probably should because I'm terrible at TikToking. Don't forget to do all the things. We really appreciate the love and support. Shout out to our Newcastle fans in Southeast California, or Southwest, sorry, California. I did it
Jesus.
again. Mixed up
Just say
geography.
San Diego.
We might have more out there, but we really do appreciate everybody liking, subscribing, following, and watching. And we will see you guys probably Wednesday or Thursday to recap another exciting week of Champions League football that Spurs are not playing in. Have a good night, everyone.